Everyone has moments in life they can't just stop thinking about. They can be embarrassing things, like that one time you face planted in front of a group of teenagers, or something amazing like the first time you hosted your family for the holidays. And on Baby, This is Keke Palmer, hosted by me, Keke Palmer, and presented by BMW, we know to savor the good memories and let go of the bad. And one thing everyone remembers fondly is their first time behind the wheel of a BMW. So come join me and BMW this summer as we explore pop culture moments and topics you just can't stop thinking about on Baby, This is Keke Palmer. Sponsored by BMW, the ultimate driving machine.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
In each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is Matthew Monagle, co-creator and editor of the site Certified Forgotten. You've also seen and read his work in places such as The Playlist, Film School Rejects, and The Austin Chronicle. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Thank you. That was a great bio. I was like, yeah, that sounds really official. I like those publications. Good polls. I like it.
Thank you.
You know, we do our research here.
I swear I'm better at writing people's bios that come on the show than my own fucking bio. I don't know. I'm like, I don't know who I am. What do you need to know? So
it's always really great when you're doing, as you guys know, because you have a podcast, where you're doing a podcast, you have to remind the guest of the things that they have going on. They're like, oh, did you want to bumper this show that you're doing or this guest appearance they had? And they're like, oh shit, yeah, I need to do that. And you're like, all right, great.
That's always the best when we get to yeah, when we get to the end and it's like, do you have anything you want to plug? And they're like, oh yeah.
Yep.
That's always great.
I guess I should mention that I did a DVD recording. I don't know, guys.
Okay, so getting to know you better, how did you get into horror, or how were you introduced to it?
Yeah, it's weird because one of the premises of Certified Forgotten on our podcast is we kind of talk to our guests about the same thing. So I've asked this question a million times, and I feel like I don't really have a great, super cohesive version of my own story because there was a few years there as a child where my family actually didn't have a TV. I can't specifically remember the ages when, but my parents were one of those, granola type groups that I guess they were like, TV is going to be really bad for our kids, so we don't want to have a TV in the household. And there were a few times where we went to the local video store and actually rented a TV VCR combo for special occasions. And that was a really big deal. But my earliest memories in terms of watching movies was going to my grandmother's house. They had a downstairs kind of ruckus room thing with a TV set up, and so the parents would be upstairs talking about whatever it is adults talk about, and I would be downstairs watching movies, pulling things what were some of the ones that were The Fugitive was on rotation heavily whenever we watched it. Just all that kind of fun made me feel like an adult kind of watches. And horror came a little bit later because I was partially because I was a kid with an overactive imagination, partially because I was a delicate flower. As my wife hates when I talk about this, but it's an important thing to understand in the context of me. I was homeschooled for a few years. So, like a kid with a little bit of like a social awkwardness, but didn't have a lot of exposure to, I guess, the kind of stuff that you get a lot of things by peer pressure when you're young, scary material, books and TV shows and movies and stuff. And I didn't really have that. So I kind of got to middle school and started ingesting horror content, and it scared the hell out of me. I was like, I couldn't deal with it. A few years later, I kind of came back to it because a friend had recommended Evil Dead, and I saw Evil Dead in high school. And that, for some reason, for as much as I have a reputation of being a guy that doesn't like horror comedies, it was like the Sam Raimi films, Peter Jackson films. It was horror comedies that kind of made me realize that I could stomach horror as a high schooler. And then it became this process by which like I had to consume as many of them as I could. I had to like gross out all of my friends. It became kind of this like assholery thing of like, oh, I'm going to show people Reanimator that I just met to see if they can hack it.
Oh God, and, I was the same way when I was in high school.
Right?
I was like,
right, like,
you're coming to a Mary Beth McAndrews movie night. We're going to watch something fucked up. They'll never come to my house again.
And in hindsight, not a great way to make friends and really demonstrate like you care about them beyond whether or not they're scared by this film. But that kind of became it. Is like I think I crossed the Rubicon, and then suddenly I was just super interested in horror, and I found stuff that really worked for me. And as I've gotten older, I found that there are particular niches of horror that are just like so impactful and powerful for me. But it's, when you boil all of that down to like, the one sentence elevator pitch, it's basically things scared you, then you got obsessed with it. It's something, we've talked about, you guys have talked about with your guests, everybody's talked about. It's just the thing that scares you bad, you either avoid it forever or you become morbidly obsessed with it. And I think the one thing a lot of horror fans have in common is we become obsessed with it.
I mean, that just distilled everything to a perfectly executable soundbite. I mean, we could just play that every time someone comes on because it's true.
I guess our podcast is over. We've gotten to the core of it.
Got to the
nice.
core of it.
I know you guys were supposed to do an episode with Donato coming up, so
sorry,
fuck
Donato.
him. I ended the podcast before he got a chance to be
Sorry,
on.
Donato. We solved it.
No, but it's true. I was thinking as you were talking back to, I mean, my kind of introduction to like what adult horror is with Jaws and Alien and Nightmare on Elm Street, and those like terrified me and I wanted to stay away from them, but then I kept coming back to it, and then I mean I'm here, so obviously pursued it. But like that is, I think that is the essence of what makes horror fans.
Yeah, I agree. And it's certainly a good way for you to sort of test boundaries, especially, and it's sort of a safe way for you to test boundaries, right? Like being a weird AV kid and being into like, pushing boundaries with horror films, I developed a sort of an identity for myself. I developed a set of interests that eventually served me well in life, that would lead to me being interested in film and film criticism and all of these things. But there's a lot of, when you're a kid in a small town, there's a lot of shit you can get up to when you're a junior in high school. And it's better that I became obsessed with Evil Dead and Reanimator and things like that than the other options that were available to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very true.
So was Evil Dead your first horror movie, or did you have...
No, I hear you. Evil Dead was not my first horror film. Evil Dead was the first horror film that I fell in love with.
Okay.
Honestly, the first true horror film that I remember watching is the subject of today's show. So we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Oh, okay.
But I will say this about my relationship to horror after this is what I found out years later, after my parents had kind of gone through this process of, okay, we're actually going to get a TV because it turns out that television is not going to screw up our kids at all. And like, they're going to come out fine on the other end. Once that kind of like that alleviated, that pressure was off, I found out that my mother in particular was hiding like this tremendous horror fan in her. She had been somebody that grew up in the Bay Area in, like the 60s and 70s and was watching just a slew of like drive-in double features. She cut her teeth as a kid on a bunch of these like, monster feature creatures from around that time period. And so when horror and horror films and, we were watching movies as a family kind of came back on the table, weirdly, it was my mother and I and my family and even within kind of my broader circle of friends that really bonded over stuff. She would leave like the most gross and weird blockbuster VHS tapes on the counter because of stuff that she had seen and really liked. And even up to a few years ago, you know, I could count on my mother during like Halloween to watch just like the worst direct-to-video things and kind of give me a precursor of like terrible stuff she'd watch. She had a reputation as being somebody that would watch any kind of horror. So it was this weird kind of thing where like after we came out on the other side of it, and after I realized this was something for me, then I was able to sort of trace back part of my obsession, I think, is because it was handed down a little bit, because these were the types of movies, and not, you know, rubber suits and creature features of the period, but at least like the kind of B horror was something that my mother had an interest in for a long time, and she was able to kind of share that with me. So it became kind of like a family connection thing that persists to this day.
That's so cool.
That's so cool.
Yeah, well, I mean, don't give her full credit. She was one of the people that took the TV out of the house and was like, no movies forever. And it was only after the fact that she was like, okay, horror movies are good. So like, give her some credit for one side of it, you know, but take some of the credit away for keeping us as a TV-free household. I missed years of important development.
I mean, it's true.
It's the pop
That is
culture,
very true.
the holes in your pop culture knowledge now.
Oh, yeah.
Of that.
Oh, 100%.
Okay, so as an adult now, what draws you to the genre?
A couple of things. One, I have a reputation, which is very well earned, of being somebody who likes just slogging grief explorations in horror. You know, my favorite kind of movies within the horror genre are stuff like Hagazusa, stuff like Black Coat's Daughter, like real slow-moving meditations on grief and guilt and trauma, and how those kind of, I mean, every horror film these days is about trauma, so that's not exactly a particularly insightful comment. But, you know, I think I like, and I have been drawn to horror films that sort of play with that human feature. I've never been somebody who got as excited for monsters or creatures. I've never, within the horror genre, I've never been a creatures guy or like a monsters guy too much. I don't have, you know, I have no real affinity or loyalty, which makes me sound like a bad horror fan, but no real affinity or loyalty to Freddy Krueger or Mike Myers or Jason or any kind of those characters. But I am really drawn to stories about like people whose lives are just slowly dissolving, because I think that is the type of horror that, you know, I have not experienced firsthand, but I recognize shades of that in periods of my life where I've been sad or periods of my life where I've been anxious. And that kind of horror has always felt super cathartic to me. To like watch something like Hagazusa, which is just the bleakest movie ever. Really, and then like come out on the other end of that and be like, I made it. It's like plunging, you know, like being held underwater and not being able to breathe and finally getting your head back above the surface. That doesn't sound like fun. That doesn't sound like if I describe my taste like that to somebody, they're not going to take any of my recommendations, but that is the kind of thing that I like. Yeah. Like, you know how like you're almost drowning and then you're like, oh, I'm going to die. And then you don't. Yeah. I like doing that.
I love that.
Movies. That first gasp of air.
Yeah, exactly. Like you're like, oh, I'm not going to die. Like, yeah, that's the feeling I try and evoke in my horror watching.
My favorite, I want a movie that makes me feel like I'm going to have a panic attack as soon as I walk out of the movie theater, when I realize I'm not in the movie. And then I'm just like, oh, I'm in reality. And it's like cold water to your face. It's great.
Yes. And I do have don't get me wrong, there's parts of me that are really drawn towards like big swing kind of stuff. Like I'm famously a huge fan of The Empty Man.
I was going to bring up The Empty Man because we had to talk about that movie.
It's there are movies where like high concept horror, like basically high concept horror or like tone poems are the two types of horror that I'm drawn to the most. And it makes for a weird watch list, but God, I love it. It's just the best. And I'm people know that I'm not a huge fan of horror comedies just because they can never, for me, maintain their momentum. And slashers are something I hit and miss with. There's a lot of other types of the genre that don't work. But yeah, basically, if I can like, when I went back, and maybe this is just a 2020 thing, when I went back and looked at my Spotify playlist, like most listened to songs in 2020, the Hagazusa soundtrack was like hours ahead of everything else. And I was like, well, if that's not like a microcosm for the year we were all having in 2020, I don't know what is.
You were not okay. Just listening to the droning Hagazusa soundtrack.
I'm a super cheerful guy. That's not the energy I like to tap into when I'm relaxing.
I get it.
You know what? I get that, though. I listen to the Hereditary soundtrack to relax sometimes, and that is not calm whatsoever.
No,
so I get
not
it.
even a little.
Not even a little bit.
The things we listen to relax.
Well, it's like the thing that they say, right? Is like the difference between an introvert and an extrovert is not where you function or where you're good at. It's where you draw your energy. So the idea is like an introvert can totally be social as anybody else. But in order to recharge those batteries, they need to go to a space where there's solitude, they're by themselves. And I think that there's just a part of that too, for me, that's always been horror and music, is like I recharge creatively when I watch stuff that other people would be like, I don't want any part of that. So like, yeah, the Hagazusa soundtrack is, which I own on vinyl, by the way, is not something that you know, a lot of people are going to take energy from, but there's just something about a movie like that and a soundtrack like that recharges my batteries.
Yeah. So do you still get scared watching horror movies?
No. Okay. No, I haven't in a long time. A good jump scare can still get me because that's like a pure fight or flight response, right? There's, you know, you can't really prep yourself for a good jump scare. But I think you, Mary Beth, probably put it best. Like the most I can get emotionally, what I want to get out of a horror film is like the feeling that you walk out and you're like, oh God, I'm gonna have an anxiety attack. Like I don't get scared, but I get like I get tense. Like everything physically kind of closes up a little bit, and that to me is a cathartic experience. But yeah, it's, you know, there are ways that you can probably juice that a little bit by like watching a specific type of movie in a specific location and then doing like a specific thing afterwards, like watching a, you know, haunted house movie in like an abandoned house that you have to like overnight. Like, yeah, I'm sure I would spend the rest of the night jumping.
But why would you?
But just
do
like
that?
But why would you do that? Exactly.
Like that's too much.
I would.
But it's hard. It's hard to sit down and watch anything and feel scared afterwards anymore. Which is sort of a shame, but it's occupational hazard.
Yeah. I have this, but the thing is like I was saying, like if I have a strong emotional reaction, even if it's not fear with a horror movie, like I find that very successful. Like you can get me like feeling very strongly. But Matt, you said that, you know, you like movies that make you feel like you're gonna have a panic attack. What was the last movie you saw that made you feel that way?
Oh, that's a good question. And I feel like I have to stall for time as I open up my Letterboxd, which I'm definitely not doing, but if I were...
all the time in podcasts is if I've never seen a fucking movie in my entire life. And like,
what are movies?
And like they're like, oh, so what was the last movie you watched? I'm like, Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. Like, I don't know. I've never watched a movie ever.
Yeah, I don't really have a good answer for that. I think that there's... well, okay, here we go. This is one, I guess, that I watched The Hive, 2015's Hive, which was like a Nerdist production. It is the antithesis of what I really like in a film. Usually, it's like a virus, camp counselors, people like killing each other, getting taken over by an alien entity and killing each other. But that had kind of like just the right combination of, you know, what you think of as traditional movie scares and more mood-based stuff that it really, really worked for me. And as
I've been meaning to watch that movie.
Yeah. As I'm not scrolling through my Letterboxd as we record this podcast, I would say probably the best example of that recently that comes to mind is Saint Maud.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which I felt like I didn't even need to... I just needed to say the title and let you react to it, and that's all that the audience needs to know.
Yeah.
And if they've seen Saint Maud, they know. And if they haven't, that reaction should
you know,
hopefully encourage you to watch Saint Maud, because it's fucking amazing.
Yep. Yeah, I agree with that. But yeah, like Saint Maud is exactly the kind of energy, you know, the like, we'll say like the second tier A24 stuff tends to resonate really well for me. And by second tier, I mean, whether or not it belongs in that tier, the Black Coat's Daughter, Hole in the Ground, Saint Maud, stuff that doesn't have the cachet of your Midsommars or, you know, things like that. That tends to be a little bit more tinged with genre, but still really tonal and creepy and unsettling. That tends to work really well for me.
Oh my God, I need to rewatch A Hole in the Ground.
It's fantastic.
I really like that movie.
I loved it when I saw it. I haven't seen it in so long.
That was really good.
We kick around the word underrated too much as an industry, but that movie is severely underrated.
And underseen.
It is underseen, severely underseen.
Okay, so talk about industry. How did you get into writing, and then how did you transition that into writing for these fantastic organizations and outlets?
So, like everybody else generally in my age group, you know, I dabbled with writing around college, and I had a blog, and I wrote a couple of reviews and stuff out of college, and They were fine. They were okay. The person that really opened that door for me, and I will always give credit to her, is Christine Makepeace, who's a friend and a fantastic editor. She's the former editor-in-chief of Paris Cinema magazine. Paris Cinema was, think Rue Morgan, Fangoria. Paris Cinema was kind of those like high design, high quality horror editorial work. Sadly, no longer with us, but I consider the beginning of my writing career to be when I responded to a random Craigslist ad because I was just like looking for opportunities to write when I was still living in Alaska, and like looking at Craigslist stuff and seeing, media writing opportunities. They had put out a call for pitches, and I wrote a piece. Actually, I'd written a college paper on diegetic and non-diegetic music in session 9. So I wrote a whole piece about that. They took it and edited it up and published it a little bit, which was really great. And I started writing for them. And when they started to publish on the website as opposed to just the magazine, I started to do some writing for them. It's all still online. A lot of it's rough, like anybody's early writing. I don't really love to go back and kind of look at it. But there is some stuff there that I'm super proud of, especially when I was covering festivals and looking into like genre horror in particular. But from there, I just kept writing. Like I've always been pretty, like I love, horror is my main reason for loving film criticism and being in the industry. But a lot of what I do is basically just opportunities for me to write about the types of films that I want to write about. So like I'll write about individual titles, or I'm very, very loyal to editors. So like there's editors that I love to work with, and they could give me any film and be like, hey, can you write something on this? And I'll do it because I like the site and I like the way that they work with their staff. And there really isn't any kind of like more magic combination than that. I wrote for a couple of sites. I built a few relationships that gave me the opportunity to write for a few more sites, which built a few new relationships. And as somebody who works full time outside of the industry, I kind of have reached a point in my career, I think, where I write for sites that I like. I write for editors that I like. I'm not trying to really elevate my profile as a writer because that takes a lot of time and energy I just don't have. But I'm really comfortable and really, really happy with kind of my portfolio of writing and the sites that I write for regularly. So I think of it as sort of like, if you told me when I was 20 years old and being like, I want to write about film for a living, I might view this as disappointment. But honestly, like this is the most satisfied I've ever been as a writer is kind of what I have going on right now. So it's hard for me to feel too much like, we need to, the definition for success as a writer is anything other than get paid, write about movies you like for sites you like. And if you can kind of figure that out in whatever capacity you can, you have to be considered successful. And I consider myself successful in that.
Hell yeah. That's awesome.
Wow. Makes me feel better.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm happy to I take great pride in the fact that I'm able to juggle two pretty different, like my day job is that I work as a director of brand and communications at a credit union. And my evening stuff is all film criticism related. And like I walk those two lines, and I'm able to have a pretty well-rounded life and still be super obsessed with things like tabletop and RPGs. So I feel like I have it all. So it's whenever I encounter people that are just starting out or kind of like reaching inflection points in their career, I always try and really hit the point home that like we have these notions of success in film criticism that are like, if I'm not on staff at Vulture or Vanity Fair, then I'm not successful. Mm-hmm. But some of my favorite writers are people that are doing this part-time. Some of my favorite writers are people that are doing this like super duper infrequently. I think it's important to remember that, you don't have to adhere to anybody's concept of success other than your own. Just make sure you get paid.
You hear that, everybody?
Absolutely.
Just make sure you get paid. Please.
Yeah, that's an important piece. You never want that to be left out.
Piece. Getting paid. But so can you tell our listeners a little bit about Certified Forgotten, what it is, the podcast and the website? I
would be very happy to. Thank you. So Certified Forgotten started as a project between myself and I'll call him my friend, but don't tell him I said that, Matt Donato, who's an extremely talented and ridiculously prolific horror film critic. Check out his stuff if you haven't heard his name before. He's great. I was going to make a joke about how we don't like each other, but I actually think the world of him, so I'm not going to do that. That said, we were both kind of kicking stuff around in I think the podcast sort of originated in 2019. And the idea was there were all of these horror films that we were seeing at genre festivals, stuff like Fantastic Fest, even stuff like South by Southwest or like New York Horror Film Festival, we really, like, the instigator for this is that we had seen a film at the New York City Horror Film Festival, which I don't even know if they run anymore. I assume they still do. But this was very low rent, very DIY film festival out of New York for many, many years that bounced around between venues for a very long time. But they had a couple of films that Donato and I were both living in New York at the same time, and we'd seen those films and loved them. And these are movies like Found, which is a great, like, coming-of-age serial killer film. You should definitely check it out if that sounds like your thing. But we realized that, like, a lot of these movies that we'd seen at festivals and loved had sort of disappeared. So the idea for the podcast was, let's start, like, let's give ourselves a really tough, arbitrary limit. Let's see if we can run a podcast that only talks about films with 5 or fewer reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. Part of that was talking about movies that just didn't have the critical reception. Part of that, too, is an understanding of the industry and how Rotten Tomatoes has sort of shaped consensus about movies, even though it's a relatively recent phenomenon and it's, let's say, it can be disproportionate in its accreditation for critics and writers and publications. And then once that was sort of at a place where we were happy with it, we realized that we wanted to extend that a step farther and create a publication, create a website where people could write about the types of movies that most sites wouldn't pay them to write about. We both were huge fans of The Dissolve, R.I.P., and the thing about The Dissolve that was so incredible is just the idea that, like, they were letting writers go long on movies regardless of whether or not, it was a quote-unquote, like, good movie to write about, whether that was a strong SEO decision or whether that was, had any kind of popular buzz or consensus around it. People had just had the opportunity to write about the films they were passionate about. And so we've been operating the site for a little more than a year now. And, we've been lucky enough to have some pretty great writers, someone who hosts this podcast included, appear on the site. And our MO is just that. Like, if you pitch us something, we've actually rejected pitches because the movies are too popular. We've had people be like, I want to write about Wes Craven. And we're like, no, like, Wes Craven is great. Like, don't get me wrong. The world needs more Wes Craven scholarship, but we need somebody to write about, like, a 2003 direct-to-video release that 12 people saw, and we will pay you to write about that movie instead because nobody else is going to do that. Like, not to toot our own horn, but, like, there's not a lot of sites that will pay for, like, the weirder, smaller stuff that nobody's talking about. So in our best days, I think that Donato and I have always aspired to be the Dissolve of genre films, which is just, is there a movie that you're passionate about? Go long on it, and we will pay you to go long on it because we want there to be writing on the internet for that film, because someday somebody's going to go looking and they're going to need somebody who can write about it intelligently and talk about it and be enthusiastic. And it's been kind of a wild ride. It's been kind of fun. The quality of the writing you get, there are just, apparently there's a whole bunch of film critics out there who are really hungry to write about their favorite films that nobody else will accept pitches on. Who would have thought?
Who would have thought, indeed.
I got to write about 2 found footage horror movies that no one else has probably ever thought to write about, and it was really fucking cool. And now a lot more people have seen them. Shut up, Terry.
Writing about found footage?
Shut the fuck up.
I would like to say that the director of Webcast himself was very complimentary of some of the scholarship that MB provided. So it's, I didn't get into this industry to like, I don't have any secret scripts or anything. Like, I have no creative aspirations as a film critic, and therefore I don't have a lot of interest in, I can't believe the director so-and-so or writer so-and-so. But I will have one caveat where when we hear from somebody whose movie is, like, gone effectively, and we did an episode or published a piece on it, and they're really excited that somebody shone a little bit of a spotlight on it, that feels good, because I got into film criticism to tell people about movies that I liked. And so whenever I have an opportunity to do that without any question of journalistic content or integrity or anything like that, when I can publish somebody who says this movie fucking rules, and that gets an opportunity to get back to the filmmaker and I get to share that with the writer, that's pretty cool. That part of it is that doesn't suck.
No. It's just so nice. And then you see people, like, interact with them after you wrote something about it, and it's just like, oh yay, like people are going to watch the movie now and, like, appreciate it. And that person, like, that director will see people really watching their film again. And that's really cool. That's just, like... Yes, it is. Because there's so many talented filmmakers, and it's so easy for things to kind of get buried. So it's nice to have them, like, realize, hey, your work is still, like, does still matter, and people are still watching it. Yeah. I mean, that was the thing with the director, and I'm sorry I can't remember his name, but the director of Webcast, when he reached out, he basically
had given up. His thing was like, if I don't drink Starbucks for 5 years, I can funnel all of that into a movie and be able to make that. And that's literally what he did. Is he calculated how much it would be to drop coffee out of his budget and then spent that like $10,000 or whatever it was on a film. Wow. And like that's a labor of love. That's the kind of thing that deserves extra attention. That deserves somebody who's out there putting their thumb on the scale and saying like, yes, Marvel, whatever, but also like, how about this found footage film?
Absolutely. Okay, so before we do transition to the movie, I want to put you on the spot and ask, give our listeners your favorite episode that you guys have done for Certified Forgotten.
Ooh, good question. Funnily enough, I actually know Donato's, which is the last will and testament of Rosalind Lee that we had with Brad McHargue, which the two of us kind of think about as a turning point in the show because we weren't really deep into that movie. In a way, I think we had a period there where we were like, people aren't going to know off the top of their head a movie that has 5 or fewer reviews, so we'll provide options for them. And we did that for like the first 5 to 10 episodes. And then we realized that everybody has something. Like every single person, like both of you have been on the show, like each of you was like, I have a movie. And then it was like, okay, we don't need to do this anymore. And unsurprisingly, around that time, as Brad was one of the first times that we let a guest pick the movie, the quality of the show went through the roof because suddenly people were talking about the things they were excited about rather than just something that we kind of picked for them and maybe they liked it, maybe they didn't, and that's fine.
Yep.
In terms of my favorite episodes, if I can't choose my esteemed hosts of today, then
you cannot.
No, you can't.
I'll exclude the two of you.
I know that ours are your favorite, but for everyone else's sake, just kidding.
You know, I do feel like for me, the experience of finding a film that surprises the hell out of me and being able to talk that with the guest is integral to that. And so I will give credit to Molly Henry, who is a regular writer at Certified Forgotten as well. She's the one that brought us The Hive as her episode.
Okay.
Again, which is this Nerdist, first Nerdist feature, cabin in the woods type premise, like lots of like blacklight and early 2010s kind of stuff. And it's so on paper, everything that I don't care about from a horror film. And it was just so smart and icky in the right ways and like really character driven. And it just like, there hasn't been a time on the show, I think, where a movie has caught me that much by surprise. And so I think that remains one of my favorite episodes because of that, is just like we were able to talk about a film that just like I was not ready for how much I enjoyed that movie.
That's awesome.
Cool. Oh, I want to watch that now. That sounds
me too.
Good. It's real damn good.
It's been on my list to watch since it came out. And you said 2015?
Something like that, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I think so.
And it's been on my list, and I've been meaning to watch it. Here we are 6 years later, so maybe I'll throw that on this weekend.
Also, the last one,
look at
of Rosalind Lee, sounds really cool too.
It's very good. That one is very good too. And that was not a film I think that came from a film festival, but I saw that at a specialty screening in New York. It was playing at some art house or another. I can't remember, but it's very slow. It's very elegiac or elegiac. How do you pronounce that? Know what you're getting into, but I think everybody, if the description sounds like something that you'd like, and I think both of you would really like it, it's worth the time.
Awesome.
All right. Well, Matt, we have talked about your horror career, but what movie are we talking about today?
So today we're going to be talking about a little film I like to call, because it's its title, Tremors 2, Aftershocks.
So, in Tremors 2, Aftershocks, Earl Bassett is now a washed-up ex-celebrity who is hired by a Mexican oil company to eradicate a graboid epidemic that's killing more people each day. However, the humans aren't the only ones with a new battle plan.
Bum, bum, bum. Okay, I have to know. I've been dying to know your horror story about this movie, Matt, since you brought this up. You and I had initially talked about it like a couple months ago, and it's been in the back of my mind since then. So give us your horror story. How old were you? How did you see this movie? Spill your guts. What about this terrified you?
Yes. So Tremors 2 Aftershocks is not a movie you probably expect to see on a podcast about the movies that scarred you for life. It's probably about as far from that as you can get. And, everybody's scared by different stuff when they're young. But nobody's going to watch it at an adult age and think that there's anything terrifying about it. That said, again, have to acknowledge the fact that I was homeschooled and it kind of changed my blah, blah, blah. Sorry, Andrea, and sorry, my mom, because she hates it when I tell that story. The thing is that like I hadn't watched a lot of film or television, and both my two most traumatic viewing experiences actually happened at my friend David's house, one of the friends that I had that was, I can't remember if he was also homeschooled or if we were just buddies, whatever. It doesn't matter. Point is that I would go over to his house and he would watch movies and we'd watch movies together sometimes. Mostly it was pretty normal stuff, like whatever. We'd played Super Nintendo, the Spider-Man game, Maximum Carnage or whatever. That was like a big hit in our house. But one day he decided to put on Tremors 2 Aftershocks. And I'd never seen Tremors, of course, up to that point. But we watched it, and it was, for my fragile little 5th grade mind, the scariest fucking thing that I had ever seen in my entire goddamn life. To the point that I went home and I did not sleep that night. And I know that I know it's this thing where you're like, oh, you didn't sleep. Like, yeah, you didn't, like, literally did not sleep. Like, my bedroom at that point was at the opposite end of the house from my parents, the house that we were renting. I was basically like living room and kitchen was between us, and I was on the other end of the house. And I was already, as a kid, I was already always terrified of the distance between us. Like if something bad happened, my parents were too far away to help us. So that didn't help at all either. But like I stayed up the entire night, like hyperventilating and crying because I imagine in particular the scene where the rancher on the car, like they go around the vehicle that's been shredded and it's just like the pair of arms that's left.
Yep.
Like that scene in particular stuck in my brain so hardcore that like that entire night was a watch. It was crying. It was like my parents had to get up and come back multiple times, go like walk across the house to check on me. And I was a mess in every way the little kid can be a mess. For Tremors 2, Aftershocks. That's the movie that broke me.
Wow. I wondered if it was that scene because what I like to do is I watch the movie and I'm always trying to take notes about, okay, what is the scene that gets, and sometimes it's always these like little moments that you don't even really think of rewatching it as an adult, but like the moment that we got to that scene with the arms that you think belong to a man that's, together just holding on, and he turns around and it's sort of like the Jurassic Park moment where the arm falls on the shoulder and they're just hanging there, and it's kind of gory for a PG-13 movie, I have to say. Just those image.
It's heavy, and there's not a lot of gore in this movie, really. Like it's a pretty, especially once you get through like the first half of the film, it's more goofy than anything else in like a fun and exciting way. But yeah, I mean, like I had not watched a lot of spooky stuff. Like X-Files was not allowed in my house because that was too hardcore for where I was as a kid. When I was probably in the 2nd or 3rd grade, my cousin and I had a My Buddy doll. If you remember the My Buddy dolls, which were sort of the instigator for the Child's Play franchise.
My buddy.
Yeah, Terry gets it. You know the theme song and everything.
He's gonna go. Yep.
My buddy and me.
Yep.
So,
and then the kid sister one.
Yeah, but we didn't have a kid sister.
Yeah, of course not.
But the thing was that like we had psyched ourselves up so bad one night about the My Buddy doll that it went into the garage. We'd never seen Child's Play. We didn't even know we didn't know, all we knew was the cover from like VHS tapes. Right. And it scared the crap out of us so bad though, like that the My Buddy doll that night went in the garage and never came out. And like that was sort of the mindset that I brought to horror movies really until high school. Is like, I like a lot of kids, I had an overactive imagination. It was really easy for me to psych myself out with stuff that was happening. I was terrified of being the last one awake in the house, which was like a conscious fear of mine for years and years as a kid. Is like I would actually sneak out into the living room at night if like my parents had fallen asleep listening to music or reading or something, and like turn music back on without waking them up in the hope that would like prolong them being in the living room with the lights on. So like I was just a very impressionable young kid, and like Tremors 2 is nothing, but for me and where I was with regards to the horror genre at that point, that was just like, that was too much. And there was enough of those little gory moments, like a total Jurassic Park ripoff, like all of that kind of stuff. But there was enough of that that it got under my skin and cost me an evening. So, and that was, I'm sure that I must have watched something, but if you were to put a gun to my head and say, what was the sequence of that? I really think that I watched Tremors 2 as a 5th grader, and then I watched Evil Dead as a sophomore in high school, and no horror movies between those two ones.
Wow.
I really don't remember anything between those two movies.
Wow.
What an interesting range.
Right?
Tremors 2 and Evil Dead. So, okay, I want to talk about the Jurassic Park ripoff about Tremors 2, because that's literally all I could think about for most of the movie, especially when they do the reveal that there are bipedal, are they shriekers? Is that the name now?
Shriekers, yeah.
Shriekers, yeah. Okay. I was trying to look up the lore around graboids, and I was very confused by the life cycle of these things.
Oh my god. I want to get to the Jurassic Parkness, but can we talk about this life cycle? Because there is a chart on Wikipedia that has the life cycle in a circle of the graboids, from a graboid to a shrieker, and then there's a little side circle about a shrieker's own life cycle, because they could populate on their own, and then it goes to ass blasters, and then it goes to eggs, to dirt dragons, and back to graboids. This cycle, someone went out and created a whole life cycle for it. Oh yeah,
they fly.
That's the 3rd or 4th one.
There is. So God bless Michael Gross, who has continued to get paid throughout his entire career for this franchise.
Yes.
But there are, gosh, I don't even know off the top of my head, because I really didn't.
6 or 7, right?
There's a bunch
of
of them,
I believe.
6. Okay.
Some of them, and one of them takes place in the Old West. One of them is an entire flashback film.
Yeah.
It is a franchise that has as much of its own mythology as any of the AAA titles that we think of, which is why it continues to persist and continues to get crowdfunded entries to this day. Is this franchise means a lot to a lot of people. Not enough to get that goddamn sci-fi show made, apparently, with Kevin Bacon, but we don't need to talk about that.
Annoyed about that. So I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
Sideline the conversation. So the Jurassic Park.
Jurassic Park arms.
Very, very, yeah, Jurassic Park arms. But that whole reveal, I think, when it was going from the sick graboid to the reveal that they are now shriekers, was very so Jurassic Park. All I could think about with the graboid, the sick graboid, was the Triceratops. When Laura Dern or Sam Neill puts his head on the Triceratops, all I could think about was that. And then it just kept going with the arms, and then all of a sudden they're on 2 legs, and they kind of move in herds, and they move together, and they communicate, and they're smart. And they're like the velociraptors. They're the velociraptors of worms, basically. And it felt very much like a Jurassic Park ripoff, which is, I did not expect that at all when I was watching it. I don't know if you guys thought the same thing when you saw, we're watching it now, but I definitely got big Jurassic Park vibes from this entire thing.
Yeah, I think it definitely, it knows what it is, and it knows what films, will inspire people to seek it out. And I think Jurassic Park is a big part of that.
Yeah.
But I think part of what makes it part of it too is it has this sort of central love story that's very, kind of blue collar, researcher, and then a blue collar guy, which is a little, even though Alan Grant is very rub dirt in it in the Jurassic Park movies. So I think that Sam Neill in that film and Fred Ward in this series kind of are, different educations, sure, different pedigrees, but sort of not too far cut from the same cloth. Mm-hmm. But I think that it's that general non-toxic masculinity of the Fred Ward character kind of gives it that same sort of vibe, that he's he's a little bumbling, but he means well, and that works in much the same way that the Jurassic Park movies work. So they're definitely getting inspiration from some of the set pieces, but I think it's also the characterizations sort of feel of a piece with the universe that they created.
Yeah, and I noticed that a lot with Fred Ward's character, where he was very often stop fucking asking me what to do. I have no idea. And I feel like in an action horror movie protagonist, they don't usually admit verbally multiple times that they don't know what they're doing. He's very much I don't have any idea. I'm just kind of flying by the seat of my pants the whole movie, which I appreciate. He's not just a tough guy, but a guy who knows a little bit more than everybody else, but just owns some ostriches and just trying to live every
and he
day.
knows when to call in the reinforcements. Like
He does.
you don't see that particularly coming out of like the 80s, and I'm trying to think about the 90s, but mostly like coming out of the 80s where you had like the rise of the action hero, whereas Schwarzenegger or Stallone or it was that kind of, or Jean-Claude or that kind of thing. Whereas here we have kind of the antithesis of that, where he's like, I know just enough to like get me in trouble. I like blowing these things up. I want to make some money, but then he's willing to call in his backup that comes armed to the teeth. But he's not like those other characters, and I appreciate that, especially watching this now. Even though I think that a lot of this is silly, I do appreciate that character a whole lot.
And I think there's one of my favorite things in movies, and kind of something that makes me feel really good about films, is when horror often has smart characters make bad decisions in order to sort of like push the premise forward. Mm-hmm. And Tremors 2, one of the things I love about it is it has characters make smart decisions that lead to bad results, or at least decisions based on their experiences that they think are smart. One of my favorite scenes in this film is where Michael Gross is Burt Gummer. He's like, oh, there's a graboid, let me shoot him. And like, just giant elephant gun, like ridiculous gun, just wastes this thing. And then the bullet keeps going, and they go and they look, and it keeps going, and he's basically blown out the engine block on a car. And his line is like, I didn't know, how could I have known? And I think that's what makes this movie and the first one so cute for me. I can't speak to all of them, but so cute for me is it's like these people that have such utter confidence in what they're doing and think they know exactly how to handle the situation. And when it gets away from them, their response is to basically throw their hands in the air and be like, well, and not like, and the movie doesn't necessarily need to punish them for it. It's just sort of like, okay, like I shot it and that didn't work, so I'm all out of ideas. That's the vibe of Tremors 2 in particular.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way, because I was like, this movie is very silly. And it was a little bit ridiculous, but it also it was charming, and I couldn't think of why it was so charming, but you just captured to me like why it was so fun to watch, even when it was like very silly at points. That captures why I think it is ultimately.
It's a lot of characters that are like, watch this, and then like roll a natural one. Basically, is how that plays out. That is the entire film.
That is the entire film. That is the entire film.
That is perfect.
I'm glad you mentioned Bert, because Bert is my favorite character in this whole movie. He is incredible. And I'm so sad. And that made me think about how I'm sad that Reba wasn't in this movie and Kevin Bacon wasn't in this movie. I felt a little cheated, I will say. I was like, I love Fred Ward. He's great, but the new sidekick to me was not cutting it. I'd never seen Tremors 2. Like, I am very new to Tremors. I saw the original Tremors, like a couple months ago. So I am very new to this whole series, and this was the first time I'd ever seen it. So that's where I'm coming from with this. But Terry, what was your experience with Tremors 2?
I was trying to think about my reaction to this movie when it first came out, because it came out in 96, so I would have been 15. And I remember being really excited for it because I love Tremors. Tremors was one of my favorite movies as a kid, because it had that kind of, it was a monster movie. It was funny. It was kind of scary. There were moments in there that stuck out in my young brain of like, this is really kind of creepy and this is really kind of cool. And so I was really excited for this one. And I remember being really disappointed that Kevin Bacon and Reba weren't in it because they were kind of that core quad of people were like my favorites. I loved those four people together. I remember being completely surprised by the bipedal creatures, and I was wondering if this was something that I had misremembered, but I went back and I looked up some trailers from that time, and they cut around the bipedal reveals. And so it was basically like they were talking, they're evolving or something like that, but it was never anything like, this is what you get. There was none of this like, we're now on the ground and we're now having these monsters that are going to chase after you on ground. So like, I remember being surprised by that. And yes, the new sidekick, Grady, isn't very good, but I'll tell you that 15-year-old Terry had a crush, because he was like the prototypical 90s kind of fuckboy.
I'm sure he'd appreciate being described that way. Well, I think so, and maybe this is just me having come to it by, I watched Tremors 2 before I watched Tremors. Yes, like Michael Gross is the reason the franchise persists, and Kevin Bacon is the reason the franchise started. But I for me, it was always like Fred Ward is the most interesting character in the movie. He's the most interesting character in the first film, and he gets to be the lead in the second film. And I don't know, like there's something about that kind of like Tommy Lee Jones, if he had a sense of humor kind of energy that he like brings to the role that is so much fun. Like he is clearly, because we've all seen movies with him in it over his career, like he's the consummate B-movie star. He's clearly talented enough to do better work. But he never seems to be, in all the things that I've seen him in, he never seems to be somebody that believes that he's like, you never get a whiff of like he's acting down or he's working below him. He's just like, he's always just right for the movies that he's in and the roles that he's in, whether it's an A-list celebrity driven kind of thing or like some direct to video kind of movie. And for me, and I could probably trace my fascination with like, B actors that have long careers over traditional like leading men. Fred Ward is like, he's the fucking coolest. He's the coolest. And he transitions between action and comedy in this movie about as good, if not better, than anybody else. Like if there is if you could distill down everything about a 90s leading man that is likable and makes you want to root for them, it would all look a lot like Fred Ward in this film, I think, because he's got the quips, he's got the action sequences, he's got the moments of chaos, and even Arnold Schwarzenegger lost a lot of fights. That was part of the fun of somebody who was gifted in comedy and otherwise. But to me, there couldn't have, because I never saw the first Tremors, this was never disappointing. It was like watching Tremors 1 was like, oh, look, like there's a backstory for my favorite character, the star of the Tremors franchise, Fred Ward.
He also has a really nice set of hair.
He does.
Yes,
His hair is incredible. Does he
His stubble is perfect.
But like there's the part at the very end, like after the explosion, where his hair is blown in such a way that it very much looks like a wig in a very funny way, that it shattered his hair, like the expectations of his hair for me. But did he come back in any of the other Tremors movies, or was this his last one?
I don't know. I'm going to assume not.
His last one.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I think this was his last one.
Okay.
I think that quickly after Tremors 2, they definitely did not have the budget to bring back Fred Ward anymore.
Well, the fact that this movie got made is kind of a miracle in and of itself, because when they originally wanted to shoot it, they had a script. The studio really liked it. They wanted a budget of $17 million, which is like, I think it was like $6 million more than the original. They were going to film in Australia, and they were going to have Reba and Kevin Bacon's characters back. Well, Reba went on a big, massive tour and said she can't do it. Kevin Bacon decided to do Apollo 13.
Well. Yeah.
And then the first movie underperformed, and so they slashed the budget down to being $4 million. A lot of the tech people decided to come on and cut their fees. The director at one point offered to direct it for free. So like the fact that this got made at all is a minor miracle.
But how, to its credit too, Tremors 2 folded that into its own narrative, right? Like the film is about Fred Ward's character kind of like being frustrated in the distance because Kevin Bacon's character made it big. Like they both had this traumatic, life-changing experience in the first film, and Kevin Bacon's character went on to fame and glory, and Fred Ward invested all of it in an emu ranch and lost video games and lost his money, right? So like the fantastic premise of this is the movie within a movie is the idea that like, yeah, like he had an opportunity to make it big. He fucked up. He failed. And so this is his second shot at redemption. And the kind of the bookend of like him finding success on his own terms and kind of getting a little bit rich in the process because of all the graboids they've killed, like that adds an extra level of fun. If they had basically just been, oh, it's Fred Ward again and there's more of the same, that would have been probably fine. But the idea that they folded into the narrative of the film, the idea that I'm sure a lot of fans were thinking of in the time is like, hey, where's Kevin Bacon? And like Fred Ward's character's life is basically, hey, where's Kevin Bacon? Like that's a neat bit of metatextuality that I think really works in the film's favor and kind of anchors it in this comedic narrative of somebody who didn't grow to resent his standings, but has reason to be frustrated and have a personal vendetta against these things.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah.
You have gone like you have just gone so much deeper into this movie than I ever would have in my entire life, and like I now have a newfound appreciation for this movie.
This movie follows me. Like it and I are joined at the hip forever. Like, I am not a Tremors fan. I am a Tremors 2 Aftershocks fan. That is what I would say.
Wow.
Like, I don't care about the franchise. I haven't watched anything. I think I watched the Western at one point. But, like, it is this movie and this movie in particular, for some reason, that just sings to me in a way that even the original Tremors doesn't.
Huh. Now, I have to say that the effects in this movie are actually really good.
Yeah,
particularly considering that it's a third of the budget of the original.
Right.
And I'm sure that some of that budget is probably the cast of that original. But, like, you have fantastic special effects people. Tom Woodruff Jr. and Alec Gillis, who would go on to do Starship Troopers, which you can kind of see the designs a little bit between these two, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. Death Becomes Her, It, Jurassic World, Fallen Kingdom, Godzilla vs. Kong.
Wow.
The car that's driving by. And then you also have Peter Chesney, who did No Country for Old Men, Men in Black, Waterworld, Mother. So, like, you have people with a huge pedigree that reduced their budget a whole lot, or some of them kind of, I think, might have worked almost for free to get this movie made. And the special effects look fantastic even to today. I love the creature design of the little bipedal shriekers.
And I think part of the reason why is like there was a few years there in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, I think, after Jurassic Park came out, where the golden approach was still this blend of practical and CGI, right? Like, even if you could do digital effects for your creatures, you were still going to anchor it by having, like, most of the monster and then animating their legs or something. People were really, it wasn't until Lucas and the Star Wars films that I think people were like, oh, why don't we do all of this as digital and see if it can work? So really that window between Phantom Menace and Jurassic Park, I think, is a great period for filmmakers approaching kind of that hybrid approach of, like, some of it will be practical, some of it will be digital. And the result, all of that stuff, like Starship Troopers for sure, but Tremors 2, Aftershocks, and other films of that ilk, they've all aged pretty well because they kind of had one foot in both camps. Whereas it's the stuff of the early 2000s where they went fully digital and didn't have any kind of practical modeling or effects that went with it, that tended to age a little bit poorly as a result. So I have a real fondness for the late 90s kind of creature stuff because it's all kind of that hybrid approach that we eventually would come back to. And now, like the new Jurassic World movies are like, oh yeah, we have models and like so much of this is practical. It's like, yeah, well, great. I'm glad you guys came back to where you were, but where you were was perfect. Why did you get away from this to begin with?
I know. I as you're talking, I was thinking back. Yeah, there are a lot of really great kind of creature features in the 90s that did that. I'm thinking like, both like Deep Rising and Relic or The Relic, I think, and just all of these movies that kind of did a combination of the CG and the digital kind of effects as well as the practical. And I'm sad that we got away from that, and I'm hopeful that with like you said with Jurassic World, that we might be starting to circle back into that more practical effects or models, because there's something missing about having a tangible creature there. I really think there is.
The scene where Earl like reaches out to touch the shrieker that's wrapped up in the back of the truck, and he's drooling, and he touches it, and it jumps. Like, you can't. It feels real because it's right there. The model is right there, and I feel like that's not as possible, or it doesn't feel authentic, I guess, with CGI or completely digital animation.
Yeah, I mean, as again, as silly as this movie is, I will take some of the creature work in this movie above and beyond even like the AAA blockbuster titles of the decade, right? Like this movie is dirty and kind of gritty, and it's very desert-y. It's all shot in the desert, but it uses practical effects, and it feels more cohesive. Like creatures, people, and location feels more cohesive than a lot of movies do. And I think there's never any questions of soundstage or CGI kind of stuff. Like, it's all clearly like they shot as much of this on location as they could. And it has a very like lived in and earthy feel to it, which of course works because they're trying to tell stories about lived in and earthy characters surviving against lived in and earthy monsters. So it's just like there's a visual and aesthetic consistency that works in its favor. And yeah, like it's a great movie. I don't know what more you guys want me to say. Everyone should go watch Tremors 2 Aftershocks.
No, but like I always, it's direct to video, and so I feel like the phrase direct to video always kind of sets your expectations low. I feel, especially like in the 90s,
especially that decade.
Exactly, like direct to video, like, oh, this is going to be terrible. But again, just emphasizing again, the creature work in this is not a direct to video vibe. Like it is like top notch horror movie effects with these creatures, because like, and again, that's probably where all the budget went, but they look amazing. Like they look like little rotisserie chickens on legs, but they have so many cool details, like the sensor that pops up on top of their head and you kind of see their brain and it looks like they're heat seeking, and the really cool like heat seeking, or the not heat seeking, what's the word I'm looking for, like heat vision, when you go like the creature's point of view and you see the way they see the world. Like they do some really, really cool things with how they construct the creatures that I want to see in more movies now. Like I want to see that kind of construction of a creature in movies.
And to their credit, they turned that into some pretty good physical gags too, like the heat vision of the creatures, like with the broomstick and stuff. Like it's funny. Like it uses the good combination of like creature feature stuff and kind of humor.
Yeah.
I actually really like the humor in this movie. It's a little bit more slapsticky than the original one, but some of the lines in it I think work really well. And particularly I love the moment where they're out at night. I believe it's Earl and Grady, and it's the moon is in the background and they hear a coyote howl, and he's like, is that a coyote? Man, he better be quiet. And then it yelps as a graboid eats it. And it's such a little kind of small but payoff and like set up and payoff joke that just like really made me giggle watching it. And there's a lot of lines like that.
Yeah, one of my favorite movie lines of all time is, I was denied critical need to know information. I am completely out of ammo. That's never happened to me before.
Yes.
He is incredible. Bert is an incredible character, and while everyone in this movie is trying their best, the acting is okay, but his performance is top-notch. I love him. His energy is just so good and kind of chaotic, and I also love that he films himself while he's driving. And I want a Tremors found footage movie that features Bert and his exploits as someone who fights graboids. These are my needs.
I'm here.
Yeah, if only all Doomsday preppers, like, off the grid gun owners were like Bert, the world would be a better place.
The world would be a better place.
It would be a better place.
But I also like how the humor is sometimes centered on the character. Like the line that I particularly wrote down is when he finally admits that Heather has left him and is not coming back, and she's like, told me to send her the HK-91. And it's like, it's such a funny little line, and I don't even know what an HK-91 is, but like you can tell that is just, that is the final moment of their relationship, and it ties back to that original one where they're unloading all of their guns into the graboids, and it informs the character, but it's also quite humorous.
And it goes back to the happy accidents, right? Like having Bert broken up with makes him so much more interesting as a character than if they'd gotten Reba back. So
True.
They just like all of these things that should have derailed it and probably commercially did derail it, I think actually make for a stronger story.
Yeah.
Oh,
that's fair.
Speaking of funny moments, though, I think my favorite, the one that really caught me off guard, was when Helen, is that her name? I completely forgot her name. That's terrible of me. The woman, the love interest, reveals that she was the playmate of October 1974. And that is like...
Kate Riley, played by Helen. Yeah, that moment.
Incredible. I was like, wait, that's a callback from the beginning. That's incredible. Like, what an incredibly ridiculous callback in the last, 2 minutes of this movie with a love plot that really is unnecessary, but that joke at the end makes it all worth it because it's so funny. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of that, and I'm a huge fan of the one that they do where each of them are caught checking out the other one's ass in the jeans, which is such a you've seen it a million ways, right? Like the guy that's like, ooh, checking out a girl, but the fact that they immediately flip that and she's looking at him and he has a nice ass in those jeans. I'm not going to lie.
It looks
so
good.
It's just it's cute. It's cute. They know what they're doing.
That was a moment that, like, as adult, I completely miss as a kid, but as an adult, I'm like, oh, I love that they're inverting this expectation of, yeah, of course he's going to look at her ass, but then she's checking him out. I love that inversion there. I don't think that they really have too much chemistry in this.
Well,
unfortunately.
yeah, maybe not, but
Matt, you're like,
I don't think she's utilized as well.
It's I think they work together in the comedic scenes, and they're only asked to be romantical at the very end. So I think that works enough for me. But you're right. I don't think, like, this is not the great American love story, Tremors 2.
No, although I will say that watching this now, because like when we talked about the first one recently on this podcast, and the thing that really, like, as an adult I was like honing in on is a sort of like homoeroticism between Earl and Val that is unfortunately missing here. But like I did like that almost at one point seemed like they were trying to make sort of a family aspect of this, where you have Earl and you have Kate, and then you have the goofy son Grady, because he is just this, like, he's a kid at heart. He wants to open up a theme park. He wants to, like, he's so excited to meet he's Earl's number one fan. He's so excited to meet his, this role model in his life. And it's just, they have this sort of like almost found family aspect that's unfortunately not explored and a whole lot, but it was particularly in the beginning. I was like, oh, they're kind of making this little family unit with crazy Uncle Bert.
Yeah, and it works. And it's another, as you were saying that, I was thinking about what that character brought to the movie, which is the idea of like the, or contributed to the idea of like the RVs with the dynamite, right? And it also made me think of the fact that, like, the big bad monster that almost killed everybody in the first film, they kill like 20 of them in the beginning of the movie.
So many.
They kill so many of them. So it's just, so much of this film is, as you said, kind of like set up in direct opposition to the first movie, and the idea of like, the family that you're stuck with in the first film, this is the family that you kind of inherit. And the entire first movie is about the fact, like, these characters that are stuck in this town and want to get out and literally can't get out. It's almost like a Groundhog Day-esque experience where every time they almost get out of the town, something turns them around and pulls them back. And in this one, you have somebody who's consciously kind of building the family around him. There's such good companion pieces, and they're such good companion pieces in a way that, the idea that the people that create these sorts of movies have to be fans of the franchise is a huge deal, right? Like, there's the new Star Wars thing. They dared hire somebody a writer for the new Star Wars series that had never seen Star Wars, and people were like, oh my God, how can they do this? And that, you don't need to be a fan of the franchise in order to create. But I think there's a real love and respect for the first movie in this movie that pays off in 100 different ways. And I think that's, this had every reason to be a cash grab. We've all seen direct-to-video sequels that just like are basically like, let's do the first thing with different faces, like, and it'll be good enough for people to spend their money. But this feels as much like a love letter to the first movie and the themes and the concepts and the characterizations that they were playing with as it does anything else. And it feels like a rare thing then and now to find a new filmmaker, a new creative team who comes in and works with a third of the budget and half the original cast and is able to create something that feels like it loves the first movie as much as we do, rather than it's just sort of like the watered down version of the first.
Yeah, I was thinking about that in particular as I was doing a little bit of research on that production history, because I was like, when I was watching this before I knew any of that, I was thinking, man, this feels like it was made with a lot of heart. And it's something that I wasn't expecting. I mean, 'cause like I said, I barely remember the movie when I was a kid. I remember the surprise of the bipedal creatures. I remember the giant worm that was hollowed out. Like, these are the things that I remembered. And so I was like, is this movie a cash in or, a cash grab? And I think probably the film company probably thought of it as such, like, let's try to create as much as we can from this $4 million budget. But the fact that all of these people gave up some of their funds to make this movie, you can really feel the heart that is on display in that. And that is something that, even though I personally do not think this is as good as the first Tremors, you can absolutely see here for sure.
Just shaking my head.
I know.
You gotta throw shade there at the end. You had
sorry.
me until the last sentence.
I just gotta do that a little bit.
That's fair. I hear you.
Now, I gotta also say that movies in the 90s had me convinced that everyone knew how to hotwire a car.
Oh, yeah.
Like, Grady's just out here, like, just hotwiring this car, and I was thinking back about, like, man, why don't I know how to hotwire a car?
I don't even know how to change my fucking windshield wipers, man. They've been streaking for like a year now, and I'm just like, well, I guess this is my car now. It's you just unclip something and clip something else in. It's like it takes 10 seconds of work. I've watched the YouTube videos, but it's just never going to happen.
No, that's when you just like go, I'm going to wait until the next oil change and ask them to change it.
I'm just going to buy a new car. I'm just going to trade this in. I trade in cars every time my windshield wipers get dirty because I don't know how to do anything else.
But it seems so easy hot wiring your car. Well, also replacing your windshield wipers, like that seems easy, but it also seems as easy as hot wiring a car. It's like you just put two wires together and you're good, right? Like that's all you gotta do to hot wire a car. It takes 2 seconds. I always thought about that. I was always like, I would think that. I would like, well, if I, can't find the keys, I can just hot wire it. Not realizing that when you hot wire a car, like you can't like restart it. Like it's not. It's like a single use at that point. I didn't know that. I was like, it's just like a backup plan.
I didn't know that either.
And it's just not like a constant thing. You just,
it's a one and done?
I think so.
Oh.
Hold on.
Listeners, hit us up. How do you hotwire a car?
Yeah, seriously.
If the police are listening, we're joking.
I'm not. Come for me, Popo.
Oh.
I don't know how to I just established I don't know how to hotwire a car, so I'm not going to go on a crime spree.
I mean, you might. This could be the impetus for starting one.
Somebody's stealing all the windshield wipers in town. Who could it be?
Monagle. I did like the fact that there is an arcade game of the Tremors in this movie. When I went looking, and they've never made a Tremors video game. There's one that was supposed to be made in 2000 that got canceled, but they've never made a Tremors video game. And considering the number of video games that were made out of horror movies in like the 80s and the 90s, that's surprising to me.
That is surprising. Yeah, you feel like at least somewhere along the lines, somebody would have made like a fun 8-bit version of it, right?
Yeah.
Like a platformer or something, side scroller that would be like jumping over graboids, which is of course the game that's in the movie. But this feels like the sort of thing where like weirdly somebody could get the license to it and create like a video game and it would be like among the best games of the year, right?
Hell
Just
yeah.
like out of left field, like Pitch Black Escape from Butcher Bay, kind of like, wow, how did they manage to take this and then turn it into something that's like rich and fun and tongue in cheek but compelling in the same way? I have a new life goal. I need to not the franchise. Again, I don't care about the franchise. I need to get the license to Tremors 2 Aftershocks and turn that into a movie or a video game. I'm gonna do backstories. It's all gonna be an origin story, and it's gonna have like Mass Effect style. Everybody's gonna kiss. I'm really into this idea.
Everyone's gonna kiss. Yay! On that beautiful magical note, do we want to wrap up and give this movie a rating out of 5?
Yes.
Okay, Terry.
Oh wait, we didn't even talk about the Precambrian part though.
Oh.
They're Precambrian life forms. We got it. I'm very good. I'm cleaning up here.
it.
Batting 1,000.
You're the earliest known.
Before we do get to that, I'm glad that this came up because I did want to talk about the fact that so this movie also does kind of increase the sort of legacy of the graboids by answering a question that I had as a kid of were these aliens or where did they come from? And while we still don't quite 100% know, it does establish that these are the oldest life forms on the planet.
They're dinosaurs. They're living dinosaurs. It's great.
So technically, they predate Jurassic Park.
They do.
Yeah.
Take that, T-Rex.
They probably make a joke about that at some point in the franchise in one of the 5th or 6th movies that I haven't seen.
Once there's ass blasters involved and
correct.
And
Well,
whatnot.
so I'm glad. This is one small thing that I was laughing about and then they address it very much like closer to the end. But it's like, okay, so we have a bunch of these things, and we just want to blow all of them up. We don't want to see what kind of like scientific maybe things to learn from them. No, just blow them up. And
I mean, that's humanity, right?
true. And I was like, but no,
don't
but I guess
understand
what
it,
made me
destroy
laugh was
it.
no one was saying anything until the very end when Kate was like, no, don't kill all of them. And they all looked at her like she was crazy. And I was like, well,
And then she kind of backs off about
yeah.
it.
She's like, oh, just kidding. You know.
Well, it's nice. Not every creature feature needs its Paul Reiser, right? Sometimes you just blow them all up.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
True.
Fine.
Sorry. I'm not going to let you talk shit about Tremors 2 Aftershocks on the Matt Monagle Tremors 2 Aftershock show. Don't worry, director S.S. Wilson, who only ever made one other movie. I've got your back.
Oh, did he only ever make one
Write
more?
about
Directed,
this movie
only
for
directed
Certified
one.
Forgotten,
Yeah.
and then get him on the podcast. And then it's just
Fair
you
enough.
and him, and Donato can just sit there and stare.
Just the second half of the episode would be like, are we going to talk about the movie that I brought? And I'm like, no, we're not. It was all pretense.
Oh, he came back to Tremors 4.
Two directed. The only two movies he's directed.
Oh, sweet.
He wrote Short Circuit and Batteries Not Included, though.
Oh.
And Wild Wild West.
Oh.
Well, the less we say about that, the better.
That is my favorite movie of all time, and I'll hear no slander. No, I've actually never seen it.
I was gonna say,
when
we're gonna
you
have to
are
have
scarred by life and bringing yourself on a podcast guest for that.
I was gonna say, I think we have to talk about our friendship. If Wild Wild West is your favorite movie.
That's the hill I'm going to die on.
Terry, how many pre-Cambrian life forms out of 5 do you give trolls? I just called it trolls too.
Ouch.
Oh,
Ouch.
that is a slam.
Oh, wow.
Trolls,
That
I'm
hurt.
sorry.
That
I'm
hurt
glad we
me.
did that at the very end of the episode, because I think we just
That's
lost Monagle.
Well,
No, it's fine.
I made it an hour and 15 minutes, so we're good.
Just gonna take off my headset and roll away from the table like a guest on Fox News.
I give it 1. No, I'm kidding. I
I was gonna say, is 1 good? What is your scale? You guys didn't tell
1
me
out
this
of
in the
5.
fucking pre-show.
Out of 5. It's out of 5.
1 is good, 5 is bad. That's counterintuitive.
We're really trying to switch it up and just make things a little quirky.
No, okay, going into this, I was honestly probably going to give it 2.5. But after this conversation, I can definitely see what they were trying to do with a lot of it. And I'm sorry, Monagle. It's just not going to be as good of a movie as Tremors is for me, because Tremors holds a soft spot in my heart, kind of like I think this movie does for you. But I will say that I'm going to give this one, and it's still going to be low for you, I know, 3.5 Precambrian life forms, because it made me laugh a whole lot. The creature effects are really good, and yeah, I like Bert a whole lot. So I'm going to say 3.5. What about you, Mary Beth?
I have no allegiance to this franchise whatsoever, so I'm going to give it 3 pre-Cambrian life forms. That has gone up a full life form from when I first came into this episode. So I take that as a win, Monagle. Please take that as a win.
I do.
It's fun. It's goofy. It's kind of stupid, but like a really good time, and the creatures are great. And it made me laugh it made me laugh throughout. So I had a great time with it overall. I mean, Monagle, I know your answer, but
Let me end with a story then, if not an answer. 5 out of 5. And I will say really quickly that it is rare for you to find movies that you loved as a kid. I mean, didn't love as a kid. We just established that. But movies that were influential when you were a kid that you come back to and you still enjoy as much. So Tremors 2 is always going to hold a special place in my heart because I hate a lot of the stuff I used to love. But I want to end with a story on my 5 or 5. So a few years ago, my wife and I had just moved to Austin, Texas, and there's a friend, Ed Travis, who I think everybody here knows or interacts with on social media. He runs an outdoor theater called Community First Village, or Community First Cinema. And I paid the not too expensive rental fee to actually rent the outdoor space because it was my birthday and I wanted to go big. And so I rented the little outdoor movie theater that he had. And then I invited all of my friends and family, and I told them that I was going to show them the movie that had scared me the most as a kid, the movie that had really fucked me up the most out of any movie that I'd ever seen, like something that I could not shake for years, the thing that broke me as a human being. And I had a very, very wary group of people that showed up on that movie night, and were like people that are not horror movie fans that were like, okay, so you're going to show us something really, really gross, right? And I was like, I'm not even going to tell you. I'm just going to put it on. And I can tell you, like, the wave of relief and, like, laughter that went through the audience when the movie started and the opening credit came up and it said Tremors 2 Aftershocks was probably the greatest thing I'll ever accomplish in my life. So I got to show this on the big screen in an outdoor movie theater to some of my nearest and dearest after hyping it up as the scariest film I'd ever seen, which is technically true, but, you know, very much a stretch of that word. And so both for the childhood fear and the adult revisiting with friends and family, it's got to be a 5 out of 5.
Hell yeah.
That is amazing.
That's an incredible.
That is an amazing story. I'm so glad that you did that. That's fucking awesome.
Yeah, I feel like I only get to do that once in my life, is really like go all out and hype up a movie and have people come in blind. Anytime I do that, if I ever do that again, I won't be able to surprise them with something like Tremors 2 anymore. So the element of surprise has been lost.
That's so awesome. Well, thank you so much, Matt, for joining us to talk about Tremors 2 Aftershocks. Where can listeners find you, and what do you have coming up on your site that you'd like to share?
Well, thank you guys for having me. I'm a big fan of your show, so it's very, very, very cool to be invited to come on and guest, especially because I don't have a movie coming out. So I feel like, why are you guys even talking to me if I'm not a filmmaker? You have such cool guests, is what I'm saying. You can find my writing on Twitter at Labsplice, LABSPLICE. I tend to write for places like Austin Chronicle and Slash Film and Film School Rejects and a couple others. Most importantly, though, continue to check out CertifiedForgotten.com. We have a couple of pieces coming out that I'm pretty excited about. Somebody pitched and wrote a piece on the American remake of Dark Water, which is a film that I liked quite a bit back in the day with Jennifer Connelly. And I think that's going to go up in the next couple of days on the site. So yeah, if you like reading about movies that you probably haven't seen and probably should, visit CertifiedForgotten.com, and all credit goes to our incredible, talented roster of writers who keep pitching us these really neat movie ideas. We love them for it.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Listeners, you've heard from us, but we want to hear from you. What is your experience with Tremors 2 Aftershocks? You can send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us directly on Twitter. I'm at MB McAndrews.
And I'm at Gaily Dreadful.
And of course, don't forget to follow the podcast on Twitter at Scarred Podcast.
And please go rate, review, and subscribe.
Please.
And tag me. If you're going to talk about this movie on Twitter, you got to tag me.
You got to
have
tag.
to.
At me, you cowards.
Thank you to Eric Power for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Please stay safe out there. But most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time, don't let the Tremors get you. And yes, I'm calling them Tremors.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children? Won't somebody please think of the children? Somebody please think of the children!
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room?
It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.